I called to ask how the trip was. "Mom?" Mark's voice sounded strange. Not worried strange. Careful strange. The kind of tone you use when you're about to tell someone their dog died, except you're the one who ran it over. "Hi, sweetheart. Did you and Jenna have a good time in Charleston? How was the hotel?" I was folding laundry in what had been Mark's childhood bedroom, the one with the window that still stuck in summer. 37 years in this house, and I knew every creak, every stubborn hinge, every place where the afternoon light pooled golden on the hardwood. "Mom, we need to talk about something. Don't get upset." My hand stilled on one of his old t-shirts I'd been using as a dust rag. When someone tells you not to get upset, you're already climbing the walls of panic. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is Jenna okay?" "We're fine. Everyone's fine. It's just, we made a decision. For you. Because we love you." The words that followed didn't make sense at first. They were English, certainly, but arranged in an order my brain refused to accept. Sold the house. Already closed. Got a great price. You'll be so much happier. Assisted living. We found a beautiful place. Modern. Safe. You don't have to worry about stairs anymore. Mark. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "What are you talking about?" "The house, Mom, we sold it. The closing was last Friday. You were always talking about how the gutters needed cleaning and the driveway was cracking, and Jenna and I just thought, you sold my house. It's for the best. You're 78. What if you fall? What if something happens and we're 2 states away? This way you'll have people checking on you, meals prepared, activities. You sold my house. I wasn't asking anymore. Mom, please don't be like this. We did this for you." I thought about the time he was 7 and broke my favorite vase playing baseball indoors. He'd said the same thing then. Don't be mad. But he'd cried. He'd been sorry. This Mark, this man with his wife's careful coaching in his voice, wasn't sorry. He was managing me. Where did the money go? I asked quietly, a pause. Just long enough. Into an account for you. For the assisted living fees. Everything's taken care of. I need you to text me the bank details. And the name of the buyers. Mom, text me, Mark, today. I hung up before he could say my name again in that new voice I didn't recognize. The house suddenly felt different, lighter, maybe, in the way a body feels light when the soul starts leaving it. I walked through rooms I'd painted, floors I'd refinished, walls that still held the pencil marks tracking Mark's height from ages 3 to 16. On the kitchen wall, my husband Robert's handwriting, Jan 1995, new dishwasher installed, RH. He'd signed everything he fixed like a craftsman signing art. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark, just a screenshot of a bank account I'd never seen before. The name on it was Jenna Clark, not even Jenna Holloway, her married name, just Jenna. I sat down at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, except it wasn't mine anymore, was it? And let myself feel it. Not rage yet, that would come. First came the grief, clean and cold as a winter river. They'd stolen more than wood and nails. They'd stolen the last place Robert and I existed together. They'd stolen every Christmas morning, every birthday cake, every July evening when we'd sit on the back porch and watch fireflies write their small gospels in the dark. I thought about calling the police. But Mark's name had been on the deed since 2019, when my lawyer said it would make things easier if something happened to me. I'd trusted that advice. I'd trusted everything. By the time the sun set, I was in my car, driving the 11 hours back from my sister's house in Ohio where I'd been visiting. Mark knew I was out of town. That's why they'd done it now. They'd waited until I was gone, like thieves who watch for dark windows. I pulled into my driveway at 2 a.m. There were lights on inside. Different curtains in the front window, a child's bicycle on the porch I'd swept 10,000 times. A young couple appeared in the doorway, backlit and suspicious. The woman held a phone. The man stepped forward. "Can we help you?" I looked at them, strangers standing in my doorframe, my door, the one Robert had painted blue because I'd said it reminded me of Mediterranean skies I'd never seen, and felt something crack and then reset harder in my chest. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady as stone. "Wrong house." I drove to the nearest motel and checked in. Room 14. cigarette burns on the nightstand, thin walls, a view of the highway. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come, but only for an hour. Then I dried my face, opened my laptop, and began to make a list. Not of what they'd taken, of what they'd forgotten I still had. I thought they stole my walls. I was wrong. They'd stolen my trust. The Starlight Motel charged $47 a night and offered continental breakfast, which meant burnt coffee and shrink-wrapped muffins. I ate mine methodically, watching other displaced people shuffle in and out. Truckers, traveling salesmen, a young woman with a black eye who wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. I wondered what she'd lost. I wondered if she knew, like I was learning, that loss has a strange weight. It doesn't press down. It hollows you out until you're light enough to either blow away or become something sharper, something that cuts back. I spent the first 2 days calling every office that might have records. The county clerk, the title company, my old lawyer, who retired 3 years ago but whose receptionist gave me his cell number after I mentioned Robert's name. Doors opened for widows sometimes, especially ones who sounded dignified and sad instead of hysterical. "Mrs. Holloway," said David Chen, the lawyer who'd handled our estate planning in 2019. "I'm so sorry to hear about your housing situation, but I have to be honest. If Mark was on the deed as joint tenant with rights of survivorship, he had legal authority to sell, even without telling me. Even then, it's not ethical, but it's not illegal. I'm sorry. When we added him to the deed, you signed a form acknowledging he'd have equal ownership. Do you remember that?" I did. I remembered David explaining it would simplify things if I died, avoid probate, keep Mark from having to fight through courts to access the house he'd inherit anyway. It had seemed practical, kind even. A mother's gift. "What about the money?" I asked. "The sale proceeds." "They put it in an account under my daughter-in-law's name." Silence. Then, "That's interesting. Do you have documentation?" I sent him the screenshot Mark had texted me. 2 hours later, David called back. "Mrs. Holloway, this raises questions. If Mark sold the house as your representative, even with his name on the deed, the proceeds should have gone to you or been clearly designated for your benefit. Putting them in his wife's personal account could constitute financial exploitation, especially if there was any power of attorney involved. Was there? I don't know. Find out. If they forged your signature or manipulated documents to claim authority they didn't have, that's fraud. That's prosecutable." I hung up and sat very still. The motel room TV flickered silently. Some judge show where people screamed about betrayal while a studio audience gasped. I turned it off. Then I went to my car and retrieved the plastic bin I'd grabbed from the garage before driving back to Ohio 3 weeks ago. Inside were the documents Robert had organized before he died. Birth certificates, our marriage license, the deed to the house, life insurance policies. And beneath those, in a manila folder marked Trust, Final, the papers for the revocable living trust Robert had insisted we create in 2008. I'd forgotten about it. After he died, David Chen had said we could dissolve it since everything passed to me directly. I'd never bothered. It had seemed like unnecessary paperwork for a future I was too grieved to imagine. But now I opened it, read every page, and found 2 things that made my hands shake. First, the trust still existed. Dormant but valid. It listed Robert and me as co-trustees, with Mark as successor trustee only upon both our deaths. Not before. He had no authority while I lived. Second, there was an account. A joint savings account Robert and I had opened in 1989, the year Mark was born. We'd put money in it sporadically, $50 here, $100 there, birthday checks from Robert's mother, tax refunds. It was meant to be Mark's college fund, but he'd gotten scholarships. We'd forgotten about it. The last statement in the folder was from 2007, showing a balance of $3,400. I called the bank. After 20 minutes on hold and 3 transfers, a patient woman named Diane confirmed the account was still open. Still in both names, and due to compound interest and some old bonds that had matured automatically, the balance was now $14,780. Has there been any activity on this account in the last 5 years? I asked. No, ma'am. It's been dormant since 2007. Can you flag it? No withdrawals without my physical presence and 2 forms of ID. Of course, Mrs. Holloway. I hung up and wrote the number down. $14,000 wasn't enough to buy back a house. But it was enough to hire a lawyer. A real one, not someone who'd give me sympathetic advice and a bill for $300. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark listening to the couple next door argue in muffled Spanish and thought about Jenna. She'd always been sweet to me, or so I'd thought. She remembered my birthday, sent me articles about gardening, called me Mom after the wedding, though it always sounded slightly performative, like a line from a play she'd rehearsed. But it was Jenna's name on that account. Not Mark's, not even both of them. Just hers, which meant she was the architect. Mark was just the hammer. I thought about calling him again. Demanding explanations. Screaming. Crying. Begging him to explain how the boy I'd raised, the one who'd wept when his childhood dog died, who'd written me poems on Mother's Day in careful crayon letters, had become a man who could sell his mother's home like a used car and sleep soundly after. But I didn't call. Instead, I got up, booted my laptop, and began searching property records, sale prices, tax assessments, comparable homes in my old neighborhood. My house, the one with the blue door, the cracked driveway. The gutters Mark claimed needed cleaning had sold for $385,000. I found the listing online, still cached. Charming 3-bedroom craftsman with original hardwood floors, updated kitchen, mature landscaping. Estate sale, motivated sellers. Motivated. That was one word for it, I calculated. After realtor fees, closing costs, and the remaining mortgage balance, the net proceeds would have been roughly $340,000. And all of it was sitting in an account under Jenna's name, not for my care, not for assisted living. For them, the rage finally came then. Not hot. I was too old for that kind of anger, the kind that makes you throw things and howl. This was cold, surgical, the kind of fury that plans instead of explodes. I opened a new document and began to write. Not a letter, not a plea, a timeline. Every conversation, every dollar I'd lent them over the years, every time I'd said yes when they'd asked for help, the down payment on their first apartment, the loan for Jenna's business that went under, the car repair, the credit card I'd paid off when Mark lost his job in 2021, $63,000 over 15 years. I'd never asked for repayment. Family didn't keep receipts, but I had them anyway. Every check, every Venmo transfer, every thank you text that said, "We'll pay you back soon, Mom, I promise." By dawn, I had 17 pages. Documentation, proof, a case. And beneath that, I had something sharper. Clarity. They'd thought I was weak. They'd mistaken kindness for stupidity, age for incompetence. They'd forgotten that I'd run a small business for 20 years, that I'd negotiated contracts and balanced books and outlasted suppliers who thought a woman in her 50s couldn't drive a hard bargain. They'd forgotten who built the foundation they were. Standing on, I packed my laptop, dressed in my most dignified outfit, navy slacks, white blouse, pearl earrings Robert bought me for our 30th anniversary, and drove to the courthouse. There was work to do. They thought I was finished. They forgot who built the foundation. The law moves slowly, but memory moves fast. I remembered Arthur Pierce the moment I saw his name in Robert's old Rolodex, the one I'd kept for sentimental reasons. That relic of paper and plastic everyone said was obsolete. Arthur had been Robert's best friend since college, his best man at our wedding. The godfather Mark stopped calling after he turned 18. Arthur had also been a litigation attorney for 40 years before retiring to raise orchids and play chess in the park. When Robert died, Arthur had stood at the funeral with his hand on my shoulder and said, "Anything, Margaret. Ever. You just call." I'd never called. Pride, maybe, or the simple fact that I hadn't needed to. "Until now," he answered on the third ring. "Margaret Holloway, I'll be damned. I was just thinking about you." "Liar," I said, smiling for the first time in days. "You were thinking about your orchids." Guilty. "But also thinking about you." I heard through the grapevine, don't ask which one, that there was trouble. Something about Mark in the house? Small towns have long memories and loose lips. Robert's cousin lived 3 streets from my old place. Of course word had traveled. "It's worse than trouble, Arthur. It's theft, and I need help." We met at a diner halfway between his town and mine. He looked older, who didn't? But his eyes were still sharp. the kind that saw through evasions and polite lies. I showed him everything: the deed, the trust documents, the bank screenshot, the timeline of loans, the property sale records. He read in silence, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad that looked like it had survived the Reagan administration. When he finished, he looked up with something like admiration. "You've done my job for me," he said. "This is airtight." Mark had authority to sell through joint tenancy, yes, but the proceeds going solely to Jenna's account is problematic, especially if they represented the sale as being for your benefit, for your care. That's misrepresentation at minimum, financial exploitation if we push it. Can we push it? Depends. Did you ever sign a power of attorney giving either of them financial authority? No, never. Are you sure? Think hard. Any document, even something that seemed routine? I closed my eyes and walked back through memory. Doctor's offices, bank visits, the lawyer's office in 2019. And then, wait. When we added Mark to the deed, David Chen's assistant asked me to sign a notarized form. She said it was standard, just acknowledging the change. Could that have been? Possible. I'll subpoena the records. If they used any form of POA, legitimate or forged, to claim authority over the sale or your finances, we can challenge the entire transaction. But Margaret, he leaned forward, this will get ugly. Mark will have to know you're fighting back. Are you ready for that? I thought about the boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, burnt toast and over-salted eggs I ate with gratitude. Then I thought about the man who sold my home while I was out of town and put the money in his wife's name. I'm ready. Arthur smiled. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who'd spent decades making opponents regret underestimating him. Good. Then here's what we do. First, you disappear. Excuse me? Stay off their radar. Don't call Mark. Don't respond to messages. Let them think you've gone to ground. Maybe staying with your sister. Maybe too devastated to function. Meanwhile, I'll start pulling records. If Jenna falsified any POA documents, we'll have grounds to freeze the sale proceeds and possibly reverse the transaction entirely. Can we really do that? Reverse it? If we prove fraud, yes. The new buyers would get their money back, the sale would be voided, and the property would revert to the last legitimate owner, which, despite the joint tenancy, could be argued to be you if Mark exceeded his authority. It's complicated but possible, especially if the buyers are willing to cooperate. My heart, which had felt like a stone for days, suddenly beat faster. You're saying I could get the house back? I'm saying we can make their lives legally complicated enough that returning it becomes their easiest option. But first, we let them sweat. Don't give them a target. Be a ghost. I left the diner with a plan and a strange sense of lightness. That night, I called my sister in Ohio and asked if she'd received any calls from Mark. 3, she said. He wanted to know when you were coming back, if you were okay, if you'd said anything about the house. I told him you were heartbroken and not ready to talk. Was that right? That was perfect. I packed my few belongings from the Starlight Motel and drove 2 towns over, to a senior apartment complex called Meadowbrook Gardens. It was the kind of place Mark and Jenna probably imagined I'd end up. Clean, safe, affordable. Monthly rentals available, no long-term lease required. I signed the paperwork under my maiden name, Margaret Louise Patterson. The woman at the desk, who looked about 50 and had kind eyes, didn't question it. Escaping someone, honey? Something like that. Good for you. You need anything, I'm in 1A, name's Gloria. Apartment 2D became my war room. I set up my laptop on the small kitchen table, pinned documents to a corkboard I bought at the dollar store, and began working with Arthur like we were preparing for trial. Which, in a way, we were. He called 3 days later, voice tight with controlled anger. Margaret, you need to see this. He'd subpoenaed the sale documents. Buried in the paperwork was a notarized power of attorney form dated April 2024, 5 months before the sale. It gave Mark and Jenna full financial authority over my affairs and assets due to declining mental capacity. I had never signed it. The signature is close, Arthur said. Very close. But the notary stamp is from a shipping store in Virginia, and you've never been to Virginia. We checked. Plus, your signature's slant is off by about 15 degrees, and there's a tremor in the downstroke you don't have. Whoever forged this practiced, but not enough. So it's fraud. It's fraud. And Margaret? I already filed a motion to freeze all assets connected to the sale. Jenna's account is locked as of this morning. I sat down slowly, gripping the phone. What does that mean for them? It means they can't touch the money. It also means they're about to get a very unpleasant call from their bank, followed by a very unpleasant visit from a fraud investigator. And if they took out any loans or made any major purchases based on that money, which people in their situation usually do, those lenders are going to come calling too. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something quieter, sadder. This was my son, my child, the boy I'd rocked through fevers and taught to ride a bike and sent off to college with a cooler full of homemade meals. But he'd also become a man who forged my signature and stole my home. And sometimes, love has to become something harder to survive. What's next? I asked. We wait. Let them panic. Let them make mistakes. And Margaret? Yes? The property itself, it's going back to auction. The new buyers were using an FHA loan, and with the fraud investigation, their lender pulled out. The sale's collapsing. If you can get financing or cash together, you could buy it back. Arthur, I don't have that kind of money. Not yet. But you have a trust, and I have an idea. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was something sharper, something that felt almost like hope. 2 states away, my phone buzzed with messages I didn't answer. Mom, please call me. Mom, where are you? We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Please. I turned the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. Outside, a train whistle called across the dark. Inside, I felt the architecture of myself rebuilding, not the soft, accommodating woman who'd said yes to everything, but something older, stronger. The woman who'd survived widowhood and raised a child alone and built a life from sweat and stubbornness. They'd taken my roof. But I still owned the storm. They took my roof. But I still owned the storm. Arthur called it aggressive estate restructuring, which was lawyer speak for what Robert would have called getting your ducks in a row and teaching them to bite. The trust Robert had created in 2008 was still valid, still active, and according to Arthur's careful reading, could be modified by the surviving trustee. Me. Which meant I could do something Robert had probably never imagined. I could turn our modest savings into a legal entity with teeth. We create a family foundation, Arthur explained over coffee at my tiny apartment. He'd brought his own mug, a chipped thing that said world's okayest lawyer, and a file folder 3 inches thick. You transfer the dormant account funds into it, plus any other assets you control. The foundation becomes its own entity. It can buy property, hold assets, distribute funds according to guidelines you set. And most importantly, it's protected from individual liability. In English, Arthur. In English, you build a fortress they can't touch, and then you use that fortress to take back what's yours. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of paperwork, notaries, bank visits, and long conversations with Arthur about Robert's original intentions. The Robert and Margaret Holloway Family Foundation was born in a filing cabinet in County Records Office, witnessed by a clerk who looked bored until Arthur handed her a chocolate croissant from the good bakery. The foundation's stated purpose: to provide educational support and housing security for descendants of Robert and Margaret Holloway, and to preserve family legacy through responsible stewardship of assets. Translation. I was taking care of my grandchildren, Mark's 2 kids, ages 7 and 9, and ensuring my son couldn't squander their future the way he'd tried to squander mine. The dormant account's $14,780 became the foundation's seed money. Arthur used his own connections to secure a short-term line of credit using the foundation as collateral. Between that and a loan I qualified for based on my Social Security and pension, we had enough for a substantial down payment. Then we waited for the auction. The house, my house, with its blue door and stubborn window and pencil-marked kitchen wall, went to public auction on a Thursday morning in November. I wore my navy suit again, pearl earrings, Robert's wedding ring on a chain around my neck where no one could see. Mark and Jenna weren't there. Arthur had made sure they received a notice of the fraud investigation 3 days earlier. They were busy, he informed me, dealing with frozen accounts, angry lenders, and a very interested IRS agent who wanted to know why $340,000 had appeared in Jenna's account without proper tax documentation. They're drowning, Arthur said quietly as we took our seats in the courthouse auction room. Don't feel guilty for handing them the water. But I did feel guilty. Not enough to stop, but enough to understand that this was grief too. The death of the son I thought I'd raised. Maybe he'd never existed. Or maybe he had. Once, before Jenna's ambition and his own weakness had hollowed him out. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice like gravel. He ran through the property description in a monotone. 3-bedroom craftsman, 1,847 square feet, mature landscaping, sold as is due to legal complications. Minimum bid $275,000. 2 other bidders were present. One was a house flipper I recognized from local real estate signs. The other was a young couple with a sleeping baby in a carrier. I bid $275,000. The flipper went to $280,000. I countered $290,000. The couple whispered frantically, then dropped out. The flipper narrowed his eyes at me. This old woman in her dignified suit who wouldn't back down. He bid $295,000. Arthur touched my hand. We can go to $320,000. After that, it's not worth it. I bid $300,000. Silence. The flipper looked at me, looked at the numbers on his phone, looked at his partner sitting behind him. Then he shook his head. Sold, the auctioneer said, banging his gavel like it was a gunshot. To bidder 47 for $300,000. I didn't cry. Didn't smile. Just signed the paperwork with a hand that stayed steady through sheer will. The house would need 30 days to process the sale, clear the fraud investigation, transfer the title. But it was mine again. Or rather, it was the foundation's, which meant it was protected. Forever. Arthur drove me home, to Meadowbrook Gardens, where I'd been living for 2 months. You know you could move back now, he said. Not yet. There's one more thing. The formal confrontation happened in the county courthouse conference room on a Monday afternoon. Arthur had arranged it. A mediation session to discuss resolution of the financial exploitation case. Legal speak for, come explain yourselves before we prosecute. Mark and Jenna arrived with their own lawyer, a young man who looked nervous and underprepared. Mark had lost weight. Jenna looked polished and angry, her jaw set like she was preparing for battle. I'd prepared for something else. When they walked in and saw me sitting there, calm and upright at the table, Mark actually stumbled. Mom, sit down, Mark, he sat. So did Jenna, though her eyes were full of calculations. She was still looking for an angle, a way to spin this. Arthur laid it out with surgical precision. The forged power of attorney, the fraudulent transfer of sale proceeds, the tax implications of unreported income, the frozen accounts, the foundation's purchase of the property, the documentation of 15 years of loans I'd never asked to be repaid. Here's what Mrs. Holloway is offering, Arthur said. You sign a legal acknowledgement that you exceeded your authority and misrepresented your mother's wishes. You agree to repay, through a structured payment plan, 50% of the $63,000 in documented loans she provided over the years. In exchange, she will not pursue criminal fraud charges, and she will not sue for the full amount of the sale proceeds. Jenna started to argue. Mark put his hand over hers. Stop, Jenna, stop. He looked at me, really looked for the first time in years. His eyes were red. Mom, I'm sorry. Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? He flinched. Both. I don't know how it got this far. Jenna said you'd be better off, that the house was too much, that you'd thank us eventually. Don't blame your wife, I said quietly. You're a grown man. You made choices. I know, his voice cracked. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But please, Mom, don't cut me off. Don't take the kids away. They love you. I love them too. Which is why I set up the foundation. Everything I have will go to them. For college, for homes, for futures. But it's protected now. From everyone. Including you. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He was out of the will. Out of the inheritance. His children would be cared for. But he would receive nothing. It wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. Sign the agreement, I said. Make your payments. And maybe in a few years we can try to rebuild something. But Mark, it won't be what we had. That's gone. You sold it, he signed. So did Jenna, though her signature was sharp and angry, pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Their lawyer looked relieved. Arthur looked satisfied. I felt empty and full, both at once. Outside the courthouse, Mark caught my arm. "Mom, can I at least call you sometimes? Can the kids see you?" I looked at my son, 43 years old, graying at the temples, still somehow the boy who'd cried over his dog, and the man who'd forged my signature in the same breath. "The kids can visit once I'm back in the house. You can drive them. But Mark, when you drop them off, you don't come in." "Not for a long time," he nodded. Tears on his face now, real ones. Okay. Thank you, Mom. I didn't say you're welcome. Some things can't be thanked away. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs in pen and smiles. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs in pen and smiles. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday in March. 6 months had passed since the auction, since the paperwork cleared, since the title transferred to the Robert and Margaret Holloway Family Foundation, with me as sole trustee and administrator. 6 months of living in apartment 2D at Meadowbrook Gardens, of coffee with Gloria in 1A, of learning that I could live smaller and still be whole. But the house called me home. Not the building, though I'd missed it, but something older than wood and walls. The idea of home, the memory of Robert painting that blue door, of Mark's height marks on the kitchen wall, of a life built with love and stubbornness. The young couple who'd briefly owned it, the ones whose FHA loan collapsed when the fraud came to light, had been kind. They'd left everything intact, apologized for the confusion, and asked if I'd be willing to sell them some of the furniture they'd grown attached to. I gave them the guest room set for free. They had a baby. They needed kindness more than I needed a dresser. Arthur helped me move in, directing the movers with the authority of a man who'd once commanded courtrooms. My sister drove down from Ohio with casseroles and a bottle of wine. Gloria from Meadowbrook brought a housewarming plant and stayed for dinner, telling inappropriate stories about her ex-husband that made us all laugh until we cried. The house felt different. Lighter, maybe, the way a body feels after a long illness finally breaks. The new owners had painted the guest room a soft gray I actually liked better than my old yellow. They'd fixed the window that stuck. They'd cleaned the gutters Mark had used as an excuse to steal my home. I stood in the kitchen that first night, alone after everyone left, and traced Robert's handwriting on the wall. Jan, 1995, new dishwasher installed, RH beneath it, in pencil, the marks tracking Mark's growth, age 3, age 4, age 5. They stopped at 16. After that, he'd stopped wanting to be measured. I took a new pencil from the drawer and wrote beneath Robert's note, March 2025, home reclaimed, MH. Then I walked outside to the garden. The rose bushes I'd planted 20 years ago were overgrown, some dead, some stubbornly blooming despite neglect. I spent the next morning pruning, my knees aching on the grass, my hands remembering the work. Where the old bushes had died, I planted new ones. Not the same variety, I couldn't find them anymore, but something similar, something that would bloom red and full by summer, roots spreading beneath the surface, holding the soil together. 2 weeks later, Mark called. "Mom, could I bring the kids by? They've been asking about Grandma's house." I almost said no, almost told him it was too soon, that the wound was still fresh. But then I thought of my grandchildren. Lily, 9, who loved reading in the corner window seat. And Sam, 7, who'd once helped me plant tomatoes and eaten 3 before they were even ripe. "Saturday," I said. 2 o'clock. You drop them off and pick them up at 5. Not a minute longer. "Thank you, Mom." "Really? Thank you." Saturday came. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. exactly. Mark stood on the porch with the kids, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Lily carried a drawing she'd made, a house with a blue door and flowers everywhere. Sam held a potted plant that was clearly from the grocery store, wrapped in crinkled cellophane. "We brought you a housewarming present, Grandma," Sam announced, thrusting the plant at me with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "It's a succulent," Lily added seriously. "Dad says you can't kill it even if you try." I took the plant and looked at Mark over their heads. He couldn't meet my eyes. "I'll be back at 5, he said quietly. 5, I repeated. Then I looked down at the children. "Come on in," Let's see if you remember where everything is." They exploded into the house like small, joyful bombs, finding their favorite spots as if they'd never left. Lily curled up in the window seat with a book I'd set out for her. Sam discovered the cookies I'd baked that morning and ate 4 before I gently suggested we save some for later. We spent the afternoon in the garden. I showed them the new rose bushes, let them help me water, told them stories about their grandfather that made them giggle. Sam asked why there were pencil marks on the kitchen wall. "That's your daddy," I said, pointing to the lines. "We measured him every year when he was little." "Can you measure me?" Sam asked. I hesitated. Adding their marks to marks felt like continuing a story that had broken in the middle. But maybe broken stories could be rebuilt differently. Not the same, but still whole. "Come here," I said. I marked their heights. Sam first, then Lily, who insisted on taking her shoes off to be accurate. I wrote their names and the date in careful letters. Below Mark's final measurement at 16, my grandchildren's marks began. A new generation. A different kind of growth. When Mark returned at 5, the kids were reluctant to leave. Lily hugged me hard. Sam made me promise he could come back next week. Mark stood in the doorway watching us, something broken and grateful in his face. "Mom," he started. "Not yet," I said softly, "but maybe someday." He nodded and herded the kids to the car. I watched them drive away, then closed the blue door and stood in my house, my home, breathing in the smell of old wood and new paint and cookies and possibility. The foundation papers arrived a month later, finalized and official. Arthur had done beautiful work. The trust was ironclad, the distributions clear. My grandchildren would receive funds for education, first homes, and major life expenses, administered by me while I lived, and by Arthur, or another designated trustee after I died. Mark was listed as a beneficiary for exactly $1. Legal language that meant, "You exist in this document only as evidence of what you lost." Jenna wasn't listed at all. I signed the papers at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd folded Mark's laundry, where Robert and I had done our taxes, where I'd sat in a motel room and decided to fight back. Then I filed them in Robert's old filing cabinet and made myself tea. That evening, I walked through my garden in the low golden light. The new roses were taking root, small green shoots pushing up through the soil. They'd bloom by June, Arthur had said, red and full and stubborn as the woman who planted them. I thought about calling Mark, telling him I forgave him. But forgiveness felt too simple for what had happened. Forgiveness implied returning to what we'd been, and we could never be that again. The mother who'd trusted blindly was gone. The son who'd thought he could sell her out was changed too, I hoped. Maybe what we needed wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it was something harder and more honest, acknowledgement. He'd done damage. I'd survived it. We'd both have to live with who we'd become in the aftermath. My phone buzzed. A text from Lily. "Thank you for today, Grandma. I love you." And then another from Sam. "Can I bring my friend next time?" He likes cookies. I smiled and texted back, "Of course. I'll make extra. Not from Mark. Nothing from Mark. But his children, those 2 small bright souls who'd done nothing wrong, they were my connection now. My reason to keep the door open even when my heart wanted to bolt it shut. I sat on the back porch as the sun set, painting the sky in colors Robert would have loved. Fireflies began their slow blinking dance across the yard, writing their small gospels of light in the gathering dark. And I understood something I hadn't when this all began. They hadn't stolen my home. They couldn't. Home wasn't the building. It wasn't even the memories. Though those mattered. Home was the woman who refused to disappear when they tried to erase her. The woman who knew her worth even when her own son forgot it. The woman who could plant new roses where old ones died and trust they'd bloom just the same. I'd thought I'd lost everything that day on the phone. When Mark said those words, "We sold your house." But I'd been wrong. I'd lost a house. I'd lost a son I thought I knew. I'd lost the comfort of believing family meant safety. What I'd found was harder and more valuable. I'd found myself. Still standing. Still capable. Still worthy of a home with a blue door and roses that came back every spring. Stubborn and beautiful and impossible to kill. When I called that morning, I thought I'd lost my home. Now I know. Home was never the house. It was the woman who refused to be sold. 3 years later, the Foundation Scholarship Fund had grown. Arthur had invested wisely, and I'd added my pension's surplus each month. Last year, Lily got braces paid for in full. This year, Sam started violin lessons. Next year, there'd be summer camp. College funds grew steadily, protected and purposeful. Mark made his payments. Every month, on time, never late. We spoke occasionally. Brief, careful conversations about the kids, about weather, about nothing important. He came to the porch at drop-offs now, sometimes stayed for a glass of lemonade, though he never came inside. Maybe he never would. Maybe that was okay. Jenna and Mark separated 14 months after the fraud investigation. She moved to Arizona. He moved to a small apartment and worked 2 jobs to make his restitution payments. The kids stayed with him on weekends, with me on Wednesday afternoons, and seemed remarkably well-adjusted considering their parents' mistakes. Last month, Mark asked if he could help me plant new flowers in the front bed. I said yes. We worked in silence mostly, our hands in the soil, the work speaking for us in ways words couldn't. When we finished, he stood and looked at the house. "It looks good, Mom. Better than when I..." He couldn't finish. "Better than it did," I agreed. "Things usually are when they're earned instead of stolen." He nodded, eyes wet. "I don't know if you'll ever really forgive me." I considered this, my hands dirty with earth and possibility. "I don't know either," I said honestly. "But I know I love you, even when I don't like what you did, even when I can't forget it. Love doesn't erase consequences, Mark, but it survives them. Sometimes that's enough." He hugged me then, careful and brief, and I let him feel my arms around him, even as I kept my heart protected. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild in a season, maybe not in a lifetime. But roses bloom anyway, even in the places we thought were dead. Even after the hardest winters, that's what gardens teach us. That's what home means. Not a place you can't lose, but a place you choose to reclaim. Again and again and again, as many times as it takes. I water the new flowers, the old roses, the stubborn perennials that refuse to die. And I stand on the porch of my blue-doored house as evening comes, watching my grandchildren play in the yard where their father once played, where new stories write themselves over old hurts. The house stands, the foundation holds, and I am home.